Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you to Tourism Saskatchewan for having us here today to present about this really important topic. So first of all, those of you who are unfamiliar with service hospitality, we're a nonprofit organization, safety association funded by employers in a variety of industries, some of which though include hotels, restaurants, commercial laundries, community services. We provide training and education on health and safety to those industries. We will come and do safety evaluations, do safety training, and then other presentations in situations like this, where we're able to be invited to share some of the information that we have. So in addition to all of that, we have events that we host. We have a website that has a lot of resources on it for all things health and safety. And today we're really going to be looking at that intersection between the physical safety and the psychological factors, and really focusing on those 13 psychosocial factors that can play a part in psychological health and safety. So those psychological risk factors are in every organization, presenting themselves as sometimes hazards in the workplace that are often hidden or harder to spot than those physical hazards that we may be used to spotting in the workplace. So we're going to learn today about what those are and what we can best do to support our workers in their psychological safety in the workplace as well. So to get started, as we get going in this path, if you would be willing in the chat to just give me a quick message with your role in the organization. And this is going to help me kind of tailor this presentation to the people that are on the call. So is it mainly managers that I have here today? What are your positions that you're holding? And that's going to help as we go through and have the discussion. Seeing where everyone's from, the position you're holding is really helpful. Thank you to everyone who is already writing in here. Perfect. I have a lot of leaders in the group, and I'm really excited to see that. A lot of similarities in terms of the roles. So that'll be helpful as we're going through here. So as we walk through today, I will be asking for examples. So of course, feel free to share what you're comfortable with. I'm not going to ask anyone to share anything they're not comfortable with. I'm going to get started here, but thank you so much for sharing. It's nice to see the variety of people that we have. So first of all, what is psychological health and safety in the workplace? So it's really the consideration of those psychosocial factors that the workplace can control that might cause harm, or conversely could promote workplace mental health. So you can have those factors that cause harm, or the ones that build up that positive mental health. Psychological hazards are like other hazards, like other physical, biological, or chemical hazards. They need to be identified, eliminated, or controlled. So having a basic awareness then of mental health and mental health issues helps create appreciation for the relevance of psychological health and safety in the workplace. Basic awareness includes understanding really what mental health is and how it impacts everyone in and outside of the workplace. So the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And what that means is, yes, you're able to go to work and be productive, but you can also go home and then do things in the evening or in the mornings when you're not at work. You have that ability to go beyond just going to the workplace. So we all have mental health, and at times our mental health may suffer, but what does that really have to do with the workplace? So I have some statistics here for you that close to 50% of a worker's waking time is spent in the workplace. So there is that significant intersection between mental health and the workplace. And it's helpful to understand that context as we discuss psychological health and safety today. So some of those stats on the screen here: 500,000 Canadians in any given week are unable to work due to mental health problems. 1 in 3 workplace disability claims are related to mental illness. 70% of disability costs are contributed to mental illness. 67% of people say their current job expectations are too demanding. And workplace demands is actually one of those factors that we're going to touch on in a little bit here. And over 28% of people surveyed reported high work-related stress. So psychological health and safety acknowledges mental health and the workplace by recognizing that the workplace has influence and control over those workplace factors. The factors, like I said, can support mental health or cause mental harm, but it's not about treating a mental illness. It's not about an individual worker's mental health. It's really a focus on identifying and controlling those factors that are under the control and influence of the workplace. So that's really important to keep in mind as we talk about mental health and we talk about psychological health and safety in the workplace, is that as a supervisor, as a manager, as an employer as a whole, you can't be responsible for every employee's mental health, not their personal health, but you are responsible for factors in the workplace that can have an effect, either positive or negative, on that mental health. And that's what we are talking about today. So increasingly, workplaces are broadening their health and safety lens, so beyond the physical into psychological considerations. And some questions you can ask are, what can cause psychological harm in the workplace? How can I eliminate or control those hazards? And if there is an incident that happens, how can I respond supportively in order to take corrective actions? Because as we know, how we react to incidents can have just as big an impact on how everyone feels, on the psychological ramifications of that incident as the incident itself. So having the appropriate reaction when those things happen, having the appropriate supports in place, and knowing what to do is really important to helping protect those workers. So this will lead us then into managing workplace psychological hazards. At the end of the day, a hazard is a hazard, whether it's a physical one or a psychological one. And as workplaces, you have a legal duty to protect the health and safety of your workers. So like any hazard, a psychological hazard needs to be assessed and controlled. If you've ever learned about hazard assessments before, either through us or through other safety training, you'll know it really comes down to spotting those hazards, being able to recognize them, knowing what they are, assessing the risk of the hazard, and then doing something to make it safer. So whether that is eliminating that hazard altogether, putting a control in place, it really is about identifying them, assessing them, and controlling them. The trouble with psychological hazards is they're a lot harder to spot, especially if you don't know what you're looking for. So hopefully today will give you a good insight into some of those things you're able to watch out for. A couple of documents now pictured on your screen. The first of which is the National Standard of Canada for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. It's a long title, but it is known as generally the standard in the psychological world, and is the first of its kind in the world. So it is a voluntary standard for how to implement psychological health and safety into the workplace. However, as I had mentioned, it is your role as a supervisor, as a manager, as an employer to protect the health and safety of all the workers in the workplace. And because of that, we need to look at their psychological safety as well as their physical safety. But this document, the CSA standard here, provides a comprehensive framework you can use to help your organization guide your current efforts towards their best return on investment, really, for implementing the program. So it can help with your productivity and financial performance, risk management, organizational recruitment, and retention. The standard is great in that it has separate sections for if you're a small organization or a larger organization. It allows you to take pieces without having to implement the whole standard. It's just a great reference document for whatever phase of this journey that you're on. The second document then shown on your screen today is assembling the pieces. So this is an implementation handbook that's intended to be used along with the national standard. It was developed to help organizations understand where to start and how to move your organization through from the initial planning to full implementation. So within these documents, this is where those 13 psychosocial factors came from. So as we talk about them today, this is the source material and where you can find more information about the topics that I am going to talk about today. So as a quick check-in in the chat here, is everyone familiar with one or both of these documents, or have you seen them or heard of them before today? Have a few no's. Well, I'm glad that I was able to introduce them to you today. They are an essential resource, and the standard is available for free to download from CSA. So it's a great starting kind of resource to start looking at. All right, so now we get into what are those psychological hazards. We talked about the 13 factors. How do these things all kind of come together? So psychological hazards include aspects of the way work is organized, social factors at work, the environment of the workplace itself, the equipment that you have to use at work, and other hazardous tasks that you may have to perform at work. So the standard identifies 13 workplace psychosocial factors over which the workplace has control, which can promote positive workplace mental health or conversely can cause harm. So again, this comes back to that distinction between an employee's individual mental health and what the workplace can control in terms of psychosocial factors. So there are 13 psychosocial factors. And like I said, it's really not about diagnosing or treating workers, but these are the things that you can control. And we're going to go through each of them in a bit of detail as we walk through today. But before we get into the first 13, I do want to make mention of a 14th factor as well. And that really is any other factor relevant to your workplace. So although these 13 that we're going to talk about are common to all workplaces, all industries, you can make them work for you wherever you are. They left the 14th one open as there are going to be things that are unique to your workplace, and we don't want to cast them aside for focusing on the things that are relevant to everyone. So if there are particular factors that are specific to your workplace, please don't ignore them as you go about putting together your psychological health and safety system. So here's going to be a super quick overview of all 13, and then we're going to spend some time walking through each factor. So as an introduction then, the ones that we have here on the slide are organizational culture, psychological support, clear leadership and expectations, civility and respect, psychological demands, growth and development, recognition and reward, involvement and influence, workload management, engagement, balance, psychological protection, and the protection of physical safety. And that last one is really important because that shows where this intersection is going to come from. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but knowing that your physical safety is protected at work does have an impact on your psychological safety as well, and vice versa. Knowing that your physical safety is not protected is going to have a negative impact on your psychological health in the workplace. So as we walk through each of these, we're going to see some of those instances where there is that intersection between physical and psychological safety in the workplace. So as we walk through each factor, I'll do a quick description and then talk about how that factor can affect the workplace in a positive way. However, these factors become hazards when they're not done positively. So for each factor, then we're also going to talk about the risks in the absence of that factor. So for example, if we talk about something like civility and respect, what happens in the absence of civility and respect? Things may start to happen like bullying or harassment or a toxic work environment. And those things then become those hazards in the workplace that we can watch out for. So this is where I'm going to ask for you to be participating more in the chat. I want you to start thinking about your role, your workplace, or even the industry as a whole. And as we walk through, we're going to say, what does this look like in the tourism industry? So our first factor is organizational culture. So this is the degree to which a work environment is characterized by trust, honesty, and fairness. So what do you hear when you hear I guess when you hear the term organizational culture, what comes to mind for you? This is a question that I'm going to ask for you to respond to. What comes to mind in terms of organizational culture beyond what you're seeing on the slide? So organizational trust is really imperative for any positive and productive social processes within any workplace. It's a predictor of cooperative behavior. There we go. Jamie says how we bring in new employees. Absolutely. When an organization has a health-focused culture, employee well-being, job satisfaction, and organizational commitment are all enhanced. A work culture with social support also enhances employee well-being and can provide a positive environment for employees. Culture sets the tone for an organization. So again, as I said, we'll look at it on the flip side. If the culture is negative, then it can undermine the effectiveness of the best programs, policies, anything you have in place. If that culture is negative, employees aren't going to feel supported by those policies and procedures. An unhealthy culture creates more stress in the workplace, lowers well-being, and it can result in people leaving the organization or creating burnout in the employees that end up staying. This is kind of one of the broader factors and really can be affected by the presence of a lot of the other factors. So as we go through them, you'll see, okay, having positive factor number 2 through 5 really will result in a positive organizational culture. So the second one then is psychological support. So this is a work environment where coworkers and supervisors are supportive of employees' psychological and mental health concerns and respond appropriately as needed. So this doesn't mean that everyone gets everything they want all the time or that the answer to every request needs to be yes, but it means that people feel comfortable to ask the question and still feel valued even if the answer is no. So again, this psychological support allows for greater job attachment, commitment, and satisfaction to the job. For some organizations, the most important aspect may be that it's especially helpful in protecting against traumatic stressors at work. If you see a lack of psychological support, though, in the organization, that becomes when people stop bringing up concerns. They may not feel safe to mention even physical hazards in the workplace. They may not want to test out, out of the box activities. They may not feel that they would be supported to go the extra mile to help out a guest or a customer. Having that psychological support in place, though, allows them to really be their best self in the workplace. So if you are a supervisor or manager, as many of you are, there are many things you can do to support your staff, as well as listening to people and being supportive from your level. You can also recommend external supports, things like if you have an EAP program or counseling services. If there is an incident that occurs, how do you create a stay at work plan instead of a return to work plan? Really, the key here is that open and honest communication and being able to say what you can provide in terms of support. Employees don't necessarily know maybe what is available, so it's important that this conversation starts with the managers and the supervisors. The third factor is clear leadership and expectations. And this is characterized by a work environment where there is effective leadership and support that helps employees know what they need to do, how their work contributes to the organization, and whether there are impending changes coming up. Good leadership leads to individuals being 40% more likely to be in the highest category of job well-being, a 27% reduction in sick leave, and a 46% reduction in early retirements with disability pensions. A leader who demonstrates a commitment to maintaining their own psychological health can influence how others act about their psychological health as well. Sometimes those middle managers, though, are at greater risk due to the fact that they are both leaders and must be led at the same time. This role conflict sometimes can lead to feelings of powerlessness and stress. So if you may, in the chat right now, can you give an example of how clear leadership and expectations either can be shown or what it may look like in the absence of clear leadership and expectations? Again, try to focus on your own organization or your own industry so we can see some specific examples of where this may come up. Okay, we have acknowledgement of all staff. I will keep asking the questions, and you guys feel free to give the examples when you think of them. Expectations need to be given in a timely manner for planning and preparation, an engagement strategy, clear communication to all staff of organization expectations. Absolutely. And you know what? Those examples lead really well into this next factor, which talks about civility and respect. So this is a work environment where employees are respected and considerate in their interactions with one another, as well as externally with customers, clients, and the public. So those clear communications, that clear leadership direction really also is a sign of that respect in the workplace. Again, this is related to greater job satisfaction, perceptions of fairness, improved morale, but also things like engagement and problem resolution. So if you're feeling respected, if you're feeling supported in the workplace, this allows people to enjoy the environment. They're going to be more productive. They're going to think outside the box and problem solve and take initiative because they are feeling that respect in the workplace. If a workplace then on the flip side lacks civility and respect, this can lead to emotional exhaustion. It can lead to other health problems. Again, this is psychological health maybe, but also potentially physical health problems if there is that ongoing stress in the workplace. A work environment that's uncivil or disrespectful also exposes that organization to the threat of more grievances, legal risks. The most extreme examples of that disrespectful behavior, is bullying or harassment that can come about. And again, that then results in many negative outcomes for both the person being exposed to that, but really a lot of people in the workplace. Things like psychological complaints, depression, anxiety, burnout, potentially aggression, and then those physical complaints as well. The fifth factor is about psychological competencies and requirements, or psychological demands. So this is characterized positively when there's a good fit between an employee's interpersonal and emotional competencies and the requirements of the position they hold. The best example of this in a not great way is when someone is promoted into a supervisory position because they've been great at doing the job that they had been initially hired to do. So you may have someone who's very outward facing, deals with a lot of guests, and they are excellent at the customer service role. Because of their excellence, you want to reward, and they have now been promoted into a supervisory position. They're now supervising a team of 10 and rarely get to do the interactions with the guests themselves again. This can, and in some cases it works well, but this can also be a great source of stress, and that psychological demand may not match up their competencies and requirements. Their strengths, their desires, what they want to be doing and what they're good at may be the guest services aspect. And now instead they're supervising staff and maybe managing schedules and doing a lot of kind of behind the scenes work that they don't necessarily have the competency nor the desire to do. And that can cause a lot of stress and psychological harm potentially in the workplace. The strain can be expressed as emotional distress, defensiveness, energy depletion, and lower mood levels. This is a good way also to lose good people if you have them in places where they cannot meet those psychological demands of the job. So I think this is one that, we've maybe all seen happen and we can all relate to, but it's important to recognize that this is something to be mindful of. And in that example I gave, what are some other options? Maybe there's a potential for, not necessarily a promotion, but maybe just an increase in pay or other ways of recognition and reward. Or as we move into the next factor, opportunities for other growth and development, even that training, that educating, maybe mentorship before the move could help with those psychological demands, which leads us then into factor 6, which is growth and development. So again, have you ever had a mentor, someone you looked up to at work? They probably taught you lots. It probably made the relationship happier, made you happier at work, made your job better, made you better at your job, made you more comfortable, made you feel supported. All of those things factor into this growth and development factor. It's fostered in a work environment where employees receive encouragement and support in the development of their interpersonal, emotional, and job skills. So employee development increases goal commitment, organizational commitment, job satisfaction. And then again, on the flip side of this, what happens when employees are not challenged by their work? They're not offered opportunities for growth and development. Have you seen that happen? Can you give a few examples of what may be the outcomes of a lack of opportunity for growth and development in the workplace? They leave. Absolutely. There could be people leaving. Okay, this seems to be the common response. Absolutely. If they're not challenged, if they have no opportunities, their well-being will suffer, their performance may drop. So even if they stay, maybe they're not motivated to do better because there's no opportunities for moving ahead. And then of course may result in leaving the workplace. So this is a good example too of how we flip that and say, okay, these are all the things that may happen if we don't give those opportunities, but what if we do? What if we have lots of opportunities for mentoring and growth and development in the workplace? Do we get to keep good people? Probably. Do more people want to come and work in our organization? Also probably. So as we look at these factors, yes, if in the absence of those factors, it's a risk, but having those factors in place is really a great way to encourage that retention and even the recruitment of other workers into your organizations, which flows in nicely to factor 7, recognition and reward. So this is characterized by a work environment where there's appropriate acknowledgement and appreciation of employees' efforts in a fair and timely manner. So recognizing and rewarding motivates employees, fuels their desire to excel. Again, this is increasing energy, enthusiasm. They want to go above and beyond. They take pride in their work. They make friends with their colleagues and treat everyone with respect. When employees believe that their efforts are being appreciated, it really adds to both their well-being, but then also their productivity and their ability to support the organization. Unfortunately, then on the flip side of that, if people believe their efforts are not appreciated, it can undermine their confidence in their work and trust in the organization. At the least, employees are likely to feel demoralized. And then again, at the worst, as you answered my last question, they leave, people quit, they leave for new opportunities. An imbalance between effort and reward is a significant contributor to things like burnout and emotional distress that can lead to a range of psychological and physical disorders. Which leads us into factor 8 then, which is involvement and influence. So in addition to being recognized and rewarded, people want to be included in discussions about how their work is done and how important decisions are made. So when employees feel like they have meaningful input into the work, they're more likely to be engaged, have higher morale, take pride in their organization and their work. This then increases their willingness to make the extra effort when required. Job involvement is associated with increased psychological well-being, enhanced innovation, and organizational commitment. So being able to be involved in some of those decisions helps people find that connection to the workplace. It shows them that they matter, that what they say matters, and that then as a result will increase their productivity and commitment. So if employees do not believe they have a voice in the affairs of the organization, they're likely to feel a sense of indifference or helplessness. Job alienation is a term, or non-involvement is associated with cynicism and distress, greater turnover, and burnout. Key decisions need to be made in all workplaces, and decisions about a specific job, team, or workplace might be required. And when people are involved in the process, employees are more committed then to their work. When they're asked for feedback, instead of just merely being informed of a decision, it affects their buy-in. This is something that we talk about a lot in the physical health and safety training courses that we do, is that if you're looking to find out how to do a job safely, don't tell the employees who are doing it how to do it safely. Ask them, what have you done to make this safer? We have these things in place. Emily Sear says workplace committees. Absolutely. So, ask, how would it be that we could make this safer? What are your pain points? You know this job as well as anyone else. What can you provide to us? And getting that kind of feedback, getting input, it could be done informally. You can have surveys or staff meetings, suggestion boxes, but getting that information from the people who are doing the job, that allows you to make better decisions in terms of healthy and safe, decisions, for lack of a better term. But if you're looking for those controls, to ask the people that are affected by what is going on there. They're certainly the experts, and they have a great perspective on what can be done better. And so as we look at that, say, for example, there is something that we're looking into for your health, for the health and safety. There is a spot in the entrance that is always slippery. It always seems to be wet. Everyone keeps slipping, but you have people who are coming in and cleaning it up all the time and taking care of it as best they can. Ask them, how do you think we could make this less dangerous all the time? Maybe the answer is a mat. Maybe the answer is not a mat, because then the mat gets caught under the door and then there's tripping hazards. They will, though, the people who are working directly there will have the best idea at how to come up with a solution. And then, as we know from the psychological factor, they have been now included in the discussions, and they are part of those important decisions being made. So this is another example of that intersection between allowing them to be involved in physical hazard controls, also enhances their involvement, their influence, and therefore their psychological health and safety. As we get into factor 9 now, workload management, a work environment where tasks and responsibilities can be accomplished successfully within the time available. This is a big one, maybe one of the biggest of the factors. As we are all asked, as everyone is asked to continue to do more with less, the hazards around workload management continue to increase. As you're, asked to do more, there's only so far that someone can go until it starts to affect their psychological health and safety. So workload management is important because there's a unique relationship between your job demands, your intellectual demands, and job satisfaction. So job demands reduce your satisfaction, whereas intellectual demands or decision-making can increase that job satisfaction. So even if the demands are high, if they also have high decision-making ability, then they'll be able to thrive. Having decision-making latitude also allows for positive coping behaviors to be learned and experienced. So this relates back to the previous slide where we talk about being involved. That can help people do more if they get to be involved in the process and make those decisions. So again, this leads to, as I'd asked before, what happens? People leave. One of the main reasons employees feel negatively about their jobs and their employers is an excessive workload and that lack of decision-making ability. So our 10th factor here, which is not the last because there are 13, is engagement. So this is characterized by a work environment where employees feel connected to their work and are motivated to do their job well. So not only is employee engagement important for individual satisfaction and psychological health, but it also leads to positive outcomes for the organizations. So In addition to this, employee engagement is related to greater customer satisfaction, because when you have happy people, they're going to be providing better service to the customers, enhanced task performance, greater morale, and motivation. The flip side of this, though, is that disengaged workers can lead to greater economic impact from psychological and medical consequences. So a workforce that is not engaged is likely to demonstrate greater turnover, workplace deviance in the form of withholding effort, counterproductive behavior, and withdrawal behaviors. So you may have another term for that is presenteeism, where you have people who are at work but are not necessarily doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. They're there, but they're not engaged, they're not trying, they're not putting the workplace's needs first. It's that disconnection, even though they are technically still there. Factor 11, work-life balance, or just balance. So this is the recognition of the need for balance between the demands of work, family, and personal life. So if you remember way back at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about that mental health being that ability to be productive in the workplace, but also then contribute to your family, to the community around you as well. This is one of the factors, I guess, that relates directly there, is that ability to balance both what you need to do at work, but also what you need to do in your family and personal life. We also talked about how the employer can only control what is going on in the workplace, not necessarily what's happening at home. And this need for balance, really, the work environment can only control what is in the workplace. And therefore, an employee who has a healthy work-life balance from the work side will have an easier time then in controlling those factors from their home life as well. If work doesn't spill into home, it's easier then for home not to spill into work either. So when employers recognize that work-life balance is important, you'll realize that the workforce needs greater flexibility. And that flexibility helps minimize conflict by allowing employees to accomplish the tasks they need necessary in their daily lives. Balance allows staff to maintain concentration, confidence, responsibility, and a sense of control at work. And organizationally, then this translates into enhanced employee commitment and job satisfaction and organizational citizenship behaviors. So that term means kind of discretionary behaviors that are beneficial to the organization are a matter of personal choice. So this goes back to that organizational culture. If you have that balance, you're going to have people that want to positively affect that organizational culture. Again, though, on the flip side, without that balance, employees with higher job stress are more likely to be dissatisfied with work and be absent either physically or mentally. Again, that not being there or being there, but not putting in the effort to do the work. When work-family conflict occurs, health and well-being are undermined, and that imbalance can lead to constant tiredness, bad tempers, inability to progress, which again leads to further then stress-related illnesses, as well as things like higher cholesterol, depressive symptoms, and overall decreased health. So the impact on the organization is increased costs from benefit payouts, absenteeism, disability, and turnover. Factor 12 then focuses on that psychological protection. So this one really talks about having that psychological safety ensured. And as I mentioned throughout how these factors all interact, this is one that really is a collection of the others. So this is demonstrated when workers feel able to put themselves on the line, ask questions, seek feedback, report mistakes and problems, or propose a new idea without fearing negative consequences. If someone doesn't feel safe to provide constructive feedback, no one's ever going to get constructive feedback, and then there's never going to be any improvement. If an employee doesn't feel safe to give a new idea or to, mention a potential for an innovation, then there's never going to be those ideas brought up, and you have a whole workforce then that you're not able to learn from. But when employees are psychologically protected, they demonstrate greater job satisfaction, enhanced team learning, and improved performance. They're more likely to speak up and become involved. They show increased morale and engagement, which again were ones we talked about earlier, and are less likely then to experience those stress-related illnesses. When employees are not psychologically safe, they experience demoralization, a sense of threat, disengagement, and strain. They perceive workplace conditions as ambiguous and unpredictable. And then, of course, the organization is at a much greater threat from costly legal, regulatory risks, and other, again, negative effects that we've talked about today. And then the last one, as I had mentioned at the beginning, is that protection of physical safety. So a work environment where management takes appropriate action to protect the physical safety of employees. Employees who perceive the workplace as protective of physical safety will feel more secure and engaged at work. Research has shown that when employees have higher levels of confidence in safety protection, they experience lower rates of psychological distress and mental health problems. That sense of physical safety protection is enhanced by adequate training with regards to their physical safety, trust that the employer is working to minimize those physical hazards, confidence that the employer responds quickly and effectively to safety incidents, and opportunities to have meaningful input into workplace policies and practices. The protection of physical safety is that important bridge between traditional occupational health and safety and the new area of psychological health and safety. So workplaces that fail to protect physical safety are likely to be more dangerous, and therefore workers will feel more vulnerable and potentially experience psychological distress and potential mental health problems because of that lack of protection of physical safety. So now just a quick check-in to make sure that everyone is still here and listening. That is the conclusion of the 13 factors. So before I finish off my presentation here, if everyone can just write in the chat one of those factors that we talked about. What is one that stood out to you, one that you remember, kind of one that spoke to you as maybe an area where you could work on in your organization? Balance. Absolutely. I feel like that is a key one in all of our lives here. Psychological support, involvement and influence, civility and respect, engagement, lots of the balance ones, absolutely. And it's important too to just keep in mind that with that balance, it really is what you can control in the workplace. Not trying to get into the mental health and the personal lives, but how can you support that in the workplace for yourself and for your workers as well? Recognition. Awesome. Thank you for participating. I appreciate it. So this is a final kind of reminder that the workplace psychological health and safety is a journey and not necessarily an end game. As I mentioned at the beginning with that standard, it doesn't say you have to do everything at once. And it really factors into, you can incorporate this into your already existing workplace safety management system. So if you have already a process for hazard identification, consider those psychological hazards as well. If you have a process for reporting near misses or injuries or incidents that happen, report the psychological ones as well. If you have a occupational health and safety committee who talks about different dangers and hazards in the workplace, make sure they're talking about those psychological ones as well. As soon as you start making changes in this area, even as soon as you start talking about it, it's going to start to have that positive effect. Any of those ones that you just mentioned in the chat in terms of balance, involvement and influence, engagement, civility and respect, you start working on those in the workplace and you're going to see that positive change right away. There are other resources, of course, that you can find. This one, the image here with the little thumbs up, there are little illustrated videos on the 13 psychosocial factors that were created when they were first put out. Of course, there's the Canadian Mental Health Association. The Saskatchewan division here works closely with us at Service Hospitality, and they're a great resource. The Mental Health Commission of Canada has tons of things online as well. And Guarding Minds at Work includes a worker survey for psychological health and safety. And then, of course, you can always reach out to us here at Service Hospitality. Psychological health and safety is part of all of our products and services now. So if you do a training session, it will cover that psychological aspect as well. The QR code on your screen right now is a live QR code that will take you right to our HSLC website, which is the Health and Safety Leadership Certificate Program. And we do provide, as I mentioned at the beginning, those safety evaluations, which are a gap analysis really of your health and safety system, but they do incorporate the psychological health and safety as well. So I believe that brings me then to the end of my formal presentation. I do have about 10 minutes here. If there are questions from the audience, if you do have anything, you can pop them in either the chat or the Q&A box. I do have some time here for that.
Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you for the presentation. One question, I know that you mentioned that workload, one of the psychological factors, workload is a huge one, but I was just wondering, is that does one factor outweighs the other, or is it a combination of all of these, or should we be focusing on one or two, or what is it?
That's a great question. And I'm pretty sure I may have said that I thought that was one of the most important ones. And I think it really does come down to what is most relevant in your workplace. But to answer your question, I guess directly, yes, one can have an effect on all of them. If you are great in all those other things, likely you won't have one that stands out. So they are fairly interconnected. If you have that involvement, you have the recognition and reward, if you have balance, you probably won't have that workload management stressor. In terms of picking the one that's most important, that's where you should start. If you do know, okay, this workload management is the issue for me right now, starting on that then is going to have a positive impact on a lot of them. So there is really that interconnectedness, but what is most important for one organization may be different from what is most important for another.
Thanks so much, Alison, for answering the question. And I guess each organization definitely has to work on solutions or putting remedies in place to really tackle each psychological effect that they may be having.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as some of them mentioned, it's important to talk to the staff as well. Is there one of these factors, and you don't have to use these terms, but is there potential psychological stressors that are having the biggest impact? You can ask about work-life balance. You can ask, do you feel like you have enough decision-making to do your job effectively? Asking questions like that, starting to have those conversations can really guide you down a path to figure out where you need to put your focus. I'll throw it out there again for service hospitality. We do have that safety evaluation that involves a review of your current health and safety program, but also includes surveys from your employees. So that can also show gaps and show where your biggest risks are and where it might make sense to start, if it's not something that you have the information on already.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions from the chat? In the chat, anyone has a question that they'd like to pose to Alison? I guess you're very thorough in terms of your presentation, in terms of answering the foreseeable questions that might have been asked. So just want to say thank you so much. Many times we really don't consider the psychological stressors that may be in the workplace. Sometimes we only zero in on one and we only talk about balance. But thank you so much. I have been educated, and someone says very informative and important. You've really illuminated my understanding of what psychological safety is and the importance of this, and how they definitely intersect and really can affect the the work life of the employee and everyone else and their productivity in the organization.